Excellent. Good stuff, Rick. Thanks for laying it all out there for us. There's just so much information going on. I do want to recognize our good friend Terry, who I see your number. We're going to get you on. Our producer, Jamie Lowell, at a point of sliding you in, and we see you on there. I want to acknowledge that. But without further ado, we want to have our good friend and really good friend of the community and Representative Jeff Irwin. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening.
We want to talk about some exciting things that are happening with marijuana reform. But I do want to ask you a quick question. We were just talking about Colorado in the news. There was a referendum that essentially removed the state senator who was pro-gun reform. You know, the whole idea was that it was going to get a lot of traction. Is that something that's really happening? I'm just curious. Does that kind of thing have an impact? Is that something that the legislators are talking about? I mean, I know it's a hot topic, but what kind of impact has that had? Just curious. Off topic a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I haven't heard anyone around Lansing talking about, those particular recalls. There's probably a couple of reasons for that. One, because, that's over in Colorado and we're kind of focused on our business. But the other reason is probably because during the lame duck session at the end of last year, the Michigan Legislature amended the recall laws in Michigan to essentially make it impossible to recall a state legislator, particularly a state House member. And, they did that, I think, at a time when the public was, choking on all of the other information that was coming out of Lansing. I mean, there was right to work. There was the reinstatement of the emergency manager law that the public had just shot down. There's a lot of different things going on. So the changes to the recall laws came through pretty quietly, but that's essentially what the Republican leadership did in the legislature is they changed the time limits. They changed a number of requirements around recalls to make it essentially impossible. And probably the worst change that I think you and your listeners might appreciate is that in Michigan, there's always been the law that you have to, if you are a recall legislator, you have to, or any public official, you have to have reasons for that. And in the past, the reasons had to be, quote-unquote, clear. And there were always a lot of arguments about what was clear and what wasn't clear, and ultimately were political people at the county level that were making those determinations, so it got kind of messy. Well, what they did last December is they added so that now not only do the petitions have to be clear, but they have to be clear and accurate or truthful. And that just adds a whole other layer of contention to the process because it's a lot easier to challenge and to muddy the waters with respect to whether or not something is accurate or factual, rather than the considerable arguments that we already had over clarity. I mean, so it made it really, really difficult to recall anyone in Michigan.
All right. Well, thanks for going there with me. Let me ask you this: a lot of things to be excited about. There's a lot of activity at the legislative level. At least that's the impression we're led to understand. And I'm wondering, in the last couple of weeks, there's been some what many would describe. I don't know if I've fully bought into it yet, but as some positive movements on behalf of the federal government. I mean, not a real change in the way they look at marijuana for medicinal purposes, but some recognition that they need some policy changes, which could always, be reversed with another, executive officer, president, or whatever. But has some of the things that have been going on at the federal level, and in light of this last announcement, which holders references to how they were going to deal with the legalization in Washington State and Colorado, has that entered into the discussions at all from the people that are running in the circles regarding either the 4271 bill or your bill of decrim for the state?
Well, there's certainly a fair amount of interest from the media when that memo came out from Eric Holder that you mentioned. I guess I suppose I look at it in a slightly different way. I don't really look at it so much as the president taking leadership on an issue that he cares about for the promotion of liberty and the well-being of the citizens of the United States of America. What I think is really happening is that the president is seeing the reality on the ground, which is that the politics of these issues are becoming more and more skewed. It's becoming more and more obvious that the public opinion in America is moving towards reforming our marijuana laws and improving them in a way that would, either legalize or certainly diminish the penalties around possession. And I think the president is just reacting to that. And we see the same thing in Lansing. I don't think there's a tremendous appetite to tackle these issues because I don't think that the legislators typically feel on solid ground. But more and more, they're hearing from folks back home that this is solid ground and that the public does want reform of these laws and that the public is sick of this failed policy of prohibition. So I really think this is a situation where the people are out front of the elected officials, and the president is just responding to what is really becoming an overwhelming chorus of Americans who are saying, what we're doing now is madness. And, and a growing majority of people who are even saying, we need to legalize marijuana, we need to regulate it appropriately, and we need to, stop this failed policy of prohibition.
I would agree. I think it was more like a political response. It's basically non-committal. A lot of people read into it. But if you do follow it through and you do hold, the commitment of what is being stated for a state to operate a, legalization regulated system or a dispensary, state to have a dispensary license or whatnot, it seems to be a very, 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 high threshold of certainty. And what I mean by that is there's, that language in the memo about it's got to be meeting the, they list their 9 specific issues that the federal government has always had and will always have, which is, trafficking and, selling stuff out the back door and selling to minors and driving and other public health issues and growing and guns and gang activity and cartels, all that. That's the thing. That didn't change. They said these are our 9 policies. In order for something to work, you've got to assure us that none of those entities that we just spoke of, those issues will not be, those issues will not become issues that on our radar. And if they do, we exercise the right to come in and shut you down. Now, the statements that bother me are that it has to be regulated on paper and in effect, in actuality. And in some of the circumstances, it seems like it may be an impossible task or to go about the putting that together to really, to conform with what the federal government's talking about. Did you read it that way, or did you see it more as a invitation to at least try, and write your legislation? Let's try to get to a ground that will meet that criteria.
Well, I read it as, just an inching towards, the policy that, the public is currently in support of. But I guess I just have a couple other things to say about it. One, and we all remember, I think it was called the Ogden Memo. We've been around this territory before, and the federal government has said before that they're not interested in cracking down on individuals for complying with state medical marijuana laws, and that turned out to be not true. And so my biggest fear is that they're going to use those provisions that you talked about to, do an end run around, this policy that they've sort of half-heartedly put out there. So that's I guess my view on that. But the other thing I really want to say is that when you look at, this is the interesting part here, when you look at those ideas that they're putting into that memo that you were just talking about, trying to, cut down on criminal activity, trying to, get the cartels out of the business, trying to keep it out of the hands of children, all of those items, not every single one on that list, but certainly most of them, those are all matters that are exacerbated, problems that are exacerbated by prohibition. And by moving towards a more sensible regulated policy like we have with alcohol and just about everything else, we know from our history that we'll do a better job of accomplishing those goals. And, is it going to be absolutely perfect? I don't think so. And I think that there's going to be some growing towards that. But certainly when you think about keeping the product out of the hands of children, that's going to be more likely to be accomplished when we have a regulated market. Certainly keeping the cartels out of the business and, not having violent gangs, own the territory where these sales are made, that is going to, that issue is only going to be improved for the public and for public safety if we stop this failed policy of prohibition. So I thought in a way the memo was interesting, maybe even a little ironic that they are, saying states, you must do these things, when in reality, if states were to move in the direction that some of the other states like Washington and Colorado are moving in, I think that we would see those results as a matter of moving towards a more sensible policy.
Understood. I had a conversation with a DEA agent today who likes to talk a lot, and we debate some things. It's kind of interesting to hear from the other perspective. And, he was very clear. He's like, there's no question it's going to be legal within a certain period of time in my lifetime, his lifetime. And he kept referring to, like, you're going to go and get it at a pharmacy, and it's going to be packaged in something that looks like a cigarette. It's going to be just like alcohol. I'm going to go into these places just like I can with alcohol, and I can check to see if they're going to be in compliance. They need a search warrant to check cigarette tax, and alcohol. But nevertheless, in his mind, he sees it as a reality, but the reality is one that it's regulated, and it is going to be grown in one big centralized place, and it's going to be sold limited, and it's going to be centralized. And I recognize that nationally there's a movement. It's a progressive movement. It's an evolution towards regulations, that there's some, interaction of certainty between the, administration of the government and the individuals in some way. And, someone within that relationship is going to be put to task to be growing the marijuana. And I understand, although I disagree with as a way of moving forward, but I understand how governments or agencies that are going to be overlooking this, it's easier for them if it's all centralized. It's easier for them if, they can have cameras on it, and they, it's one place. They have to go to 10 or 15 or 20 places instead of, but, my personal view is that I like the idea of the existing caregiver system instead doing that, instead being the suppliers of what will ultimately be. But I see
there's a certain beauty to freedom and liberty. I mean, I think the direction that your friend is suggesting we're going to move in, I think that's an example of someone who perhaps thinks that the government has greater capacity than it really does. And I think that's one of the problems I see a lot in Lansing and Washington, D.C. You get these elected officials, I've probably been prone to this myself from time to time, getting the idea that, hey, we can fix this, or hey, we can control this. The underground economy in marijuana has been so mature in this country for so many years, and there have been so many people who have been involved in it, millions, and who have developed, their own markets and means of production and all of that. And so I think if the government comes in and tries to impose some sort of very heavy-handed regulatory regime and high taxes and those types of things, we're going to be right back to a bootlegging kind of situation, and it's going to be a mess. I think that the government needs to be very, very careful in how it regulates this product, and be careful in a way so that we don't overstep and end up completely failing in trying to make it a safer transaction for everybody involved. So I guess that's how I see it. I think that these ideas that there's going to be some centralized growing facility, I think that is not realistic in the short term, only realistic in the long term. I think the only way we get to that point is if marijuana is safe, legal, and regulated for many, many, many years, and some big company or some smart individual comes up with a way to grow the best product in large quantities for the lowest price and ends up dominating the market in that way. I think that's the way we'll see that kind of consolidation of the production of marijuana, not through some sort of government regulations. I think at least in the short term, if the government tries to go that route, I think we're going to find out once again that the government just simply doesn't have the capacity to, mind every minute of every American's life and know what they're doing in their bedroom and what they're doing in their basement. And we don't even want the government to have that kind of capacity, and I just don't think it does.
As I was discussing it, and I want to move off this in a second with this D agent, I said, what would be so bad if the people who are the caregivers now, or someone could become a caregiver and make a little extra money? I mean, filling that economic branch or that group of persons, and empowering them to earn some money and do it lawfully and make a living. Would that be such a bad thing? It's like it's never going to happen. But do you see the battle in the landscape being not so much in the short term, but like the long term over control of that? You know, who's gonna be making the money from the growing? You know, is it gonna be an opportunity? Yeah. Do you see it that?
Well, maybe in the long term. I mean, like I said, maybe in the long term I see some consolidation there, but I see it more sort of in a market and capital sense than in a government command and control sense. You know, I mean, I think about it this way. You know, a lot of people like to grow their own tomatoes, but most people, even though tomatoes are very easy to grow, go to the store and buy their tomatoes at the store. And, you know, I think that at a certain point in the future, if we do improve our marijuana laws and get a more sort of safe and regulated market, you know, I think at a certain point, decades in the future, it could mature to that point when most people are thinking, oh, gosh, why would you grow it on your own? Because, you know, you can just get it from Marlboro. But, I don't see that happening in the short term, and I think that if the government tries to force that type of result where, you know, taking more of sort of a Canadian model maybe, if that's fair, I think it's going to fall on its face here in the States because, once again, you know, people have already developed, you know, the means to produce and trade in these products despite the fact that the government doesn't like it. And I think that if the government tries to overplay its hand, you know, you're just going to empower people who are going to go around the government and avoid the tax man, and there'll be all sorts of problems incumbent to that relationship.
Right, it has a negative effect. I remember reading some comments from some of the lawyer thread about the regulations that created a higher tax, increased the price of the cannabis, whether it was recreational or not, and then turned people back to the black market where they get it cheaper, you know. And
exactly.
That's kind of what you're talking about. All right, so I don't want to. That's all fascinating to me, and I appreciate all your comments on that. What can you tell us about the momentum in the legislature with these two bills that the community is very interested in, both 42.7, which I know you were co-sponsoring with your co-sponsor with Carlton and Representative Carlton, I understand, and also you've got this statewide decriminalization bill as well. What is the? It's been out there a little bit. I know there's a very successful event a couple weeks back at Grass Lake.
Yeah. Well, you know, there is some visible momentum. I mean, when you see the comments from the legislative leaders on these subjects, I wouldn't say they're endorsing my bill or Representative Carlton's bill, but they're very cautious statements that seem to be indicate a willingness to bring these bills forward, and that's an important, maybe not green light, but at least yellow light from the leadership in the House. You've got the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who already had one hearing generally on these issues. I think that shows a willingness right before the summer to kind of take these things on this fall. Now, I certainly haven't gotten a clear indication yet how far he's going to want to take these issues this fall, and I know that the Judiciary Committee is pretty busy because I sit on it, but certainly a number of us are availing upon him to take these issues on, and I think there's a little bit of willingness there. But, you know, we're going to have to find out here in the coming weeks. And we really did just get back into the swing of things in Lansing just last week, and, you know, I think the moment of truth is going to be here in the next maybe 2 months. Now, the other thing that's going on, I think, is very, very positive, is that there's a tremendous amount of positive media coverage about this, and that there's a lot of interest from the public. I know I've heard from a number of my fellow representatives that they've had, you know, office visits and phone calls, and I've had a number of my colleagues, particularly on the Democratic side, you know, coming to me and saying, well, you know, what's your take on this? You know, I heard this from some activists in my community. You know, how does that square with, you know, what you're trying to do with your bill or with Carlton's bill? So there is a lot of interest and talk about it going around Lansing. I think that's all really, really positive. In addition to that, one of the co-sponsors of my bill was Representative Mike Shirkey from Jackson. And to have Representative Shirkey and I working together on this bill, I think is very, very interesting because, as they say sometimes in politics, when you curl the left and you curl the right around, eventually they meet. And so, you know, Representative Shirkey is unquestionably a very conservative player and well-respected in that community in the legislature. And he was willing to, you know, put his name on the line to say, this is a conversation we need to have. This is an important issue. We're spending a lot of money on a policy that appears from all angles to be failing. And so the fact that he's willing to take that conversation on and, as you mentioned, have a town hall meeting in his district to talk about those issues, I think is a great sign. And that event happened in Grass Lake, and we had great attendance out at Grass Lake Township Hall, and you know, heard from a lot of citizens who were, you know, very supportive. You know, we had some folks come who weren't supportive, and frankly, we had a great conversation. The most interesting thing to me was that the individuals who were not supportive were mostly frustrated that the bill didn't go far enough. So, I think that there's a lot of energy from the public. Like I said at the very, very beginning, the public opinion on this issue is moving very, very fast in a positive direction. And I think that that's palpable for most elected officials who have their ear to the ground.
Final question. The forfeiture bill, I can tell you clients that I've spoken to who are in a, when they hear about the law as it currently exists, they go, that's the law in the United States of America? And I say, yes, it is. Tell me about the forfeiture reform bill legislation that you're sponsoring, right? It's
I haven't introduced it yet. We've been working on it for a while, and it's gotten sort of complicated just because of an interest in maybe bringing in some of the nuisance forfeiture and taking various different looks at what would be the best proposal that might have a chance of passing. But my interest is in creating a system whereby the government is not going to take people's stuff, people's money, people's assets, people's homes, people's cars, unless that person is guilty of a crime. I think that it's outrageous, and it really strains credulity that the state of the law in Michigan today is that the government can take your possessions and never charge you and never convict you. There's really not a lot to recommend that. So that's my goal. I'd like to change that. But I've also been trying to work on, what are some of the details, what are some of the other things that we might be able to change that might get more traction or might not draw the ire of the law enforcement community. So I've been trying to reach out to law enforcement and prosecutors and get their opinion, and we've been talking about it a lot over the summer, and I think that you're going to see a bill get introduced here probably in the next 30 to 60 days. Now, I would also mention, I don't know if your listeners were able to read the recent article in the New Yorker by Sarah Stillman. I don't remember the name of the article, but if you look up New Yorker and the name of the journalist is Sarah Stillman, she wrote an excellent article, very, very in-depth, about the problems and abuses with asset forfeiture across the country. And she featured a story from here in Michigan, and so it's a very, very interesting article. There's a lot of interest in this. I know that the ACLU has been very, very interested. They had a great report nationally that was released maybe 6 months ago that really documented some of the abuses all over the country with civil asset forfeiture. So, I'm still interested in that issue, and I think you're going to see a final product here pretty soon.
I wonder if, there's no right to a jury trial. You'll get a bench trial only. I wonder if that is something that would change the dynamics. I find it, there's a motivation, unfortunately, by law enforcement to find someone in violation of, the act, so then they're acting, as someone in violation of the public health code. They don't get the immunity. But it is very difficult to implement a protective law when the incentives for money still exist in the law enforcement, narcotics, community. But
hey, the name of that article is Taken by Sarah Stillman, published August 12th in the New York.
It's a great article, and she wrote a previous one about 6 months before that called The Throwaways, which is it's a heart-wrenching article about how confidential informants are used and often abused by the criminal justice system. So, she details a tragic story in Detroit of a young woman named Shelley Hilliard who was murdered as a result of her turning in her drug dealer. And so, there's a lot of talk going nationally about these issues, and I'm hoping that we can harness some of that here in Michigan, and that we can work with, maybe some friends, sort of on the more libertarian side of the conservative group, or maybe even some folks in law enforcement who understand that there are some perverse incentives here, there are some abuses, and most of the folks in law enforcement don't like to see those abuses get splashed across the newspapers because it gives them a bad name too, and most of those folks are not interested in enforcing bad laws either.
Amen to that. Listen, it's always a pleasure. It's fascinating to talk to you. Everyone loves what you're doing in Lansing, and we appreciate all your hard work and trying to bring some common sense to this some of these insane archaic laws. Thank you very much, Representative, and I look forward to seeing you soon. You will, of course.
Great, thanks, and hopefully you can keep up the letters and the calls because I'm definitely hearing about it, and that's the kind of pressure that we need.
Rep. Irwin, you will be speaking at Saturday night at the NPRA fundraiser in Ann Arbor at the Ann Arbor Art Center.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless wild horses tear me away, I will be there, and hopefully there'll be a lot of folks there to support the work.
What a great event it was last time, and I'm sure it'll be just as equally wonderful this time.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Good
Have
night.
a great night. All right. We'll take a quick break, regroup, and we got our next guest on. I see everyone in the queue that we will be getting to you. Short break, Planet Green Trees. 1-347-326-9626. We'll be right back.